Thank you very much for coming tonight. As I announced last time, we are going to start a season now about Greek philosophy. So last time we spoke about Greek mythology, and if you remember, that was the realm of gods, the realm of Uranus and Gaia, and then Kronos and Hera and Zeus and all these 12 gods living in that Decatheon, the heaven on Acropolis where gods lived. So the world was ruled by gods, and people have taken them as absolute reality. Greeks identify with gods. They invented them in their own liking in order to justify their lives. We discussed it last time, so I'm just trying to remind you how the world started with this exceptionally peculiar question of the being, of existence. They had their own answers to the gods. But then, in the 7th century BC, Thales, the first philosopher, who was born in 626 BC, saw things slightly differently. So there is an emergence of philosophical inquiry now into the being, into the essence of all things. And Eleatic philosophers, as they are known, pre-Socratics, they are concerned about metaphysics. So far, they were talking mainly about ethics. When I talked about Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Kant, and when I talked about existentialists. So if you remember, ethics was the main subject. But you will see how philosophical discourse actually started on the global level with metaphysics. So metaphysics in Greek comes from Greek word meta ta physika, meaning beyond the reality, beyond physics. So what is the essence of everything that we see, everything we know? Aristotle split, for example, philosophy into metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. So metaphysics is the whole separate section of inquiry, and it requires a massive amount of effort, intellectual effort, to actually help us understand where are we coming from. Because knowing about essence of the world, knowing about it being, it would be much easier to navigate into ethics and aesthetics, hence politics, if you like. So Thales thought that the prime origin of all things is actually water. So he looked around, and all he saw rivers, he saw seas, rain, he saw everything living, with everything, moisture everywhere. So he concluded that water is basically the essence of all things. That wasn't that far from truth, but you see how naive this first attempt to discover the essence of being can sound to us now. So water is the main essence of everything, is the origin of all things. So there are three important reasons to consider his propositions. First, Thales is telling, or Thales in Greek, is telling us something about the primal origin of the world. So first time we have the primal origin of the world by saying to us, essence of everything, essence of the being is water. Then the second, he speaks in a language which is devoid of images and fables. Language that was more acquainted to mythology. He doesn't talk fables, he doesn't talk in images. He is now scientific mind. He is trying to really express himself in the world which is around us, not in a world full of imagination and images and stories and fables, but rather some scientific explanation. And the third one, important aspect of his theory is that it contains the thought that all is one. So all of a sudden you have that narrowing of the focus. All is one. So now we have water as the essence, right? So this one, this one is, I decided just to mention him as the first one, obviously, because he deserves attention. But then the next thinker, who was born in 610 BC, is Anaximander. So Anaximander, it's a different philosopher, and he is now concerned about being and everything that comes to be. So he sees the difference between something which we can call being, which is eternal, which is permanent, unchangeable, and everything else that comes to be. Because everything that comes to be passes away. So now his problem for Anaximander is actually, how can something that comes to be pass away? If something has the right to be, how can we accept that it's going to pass away? So it seems as for him, although it sounds illogical, that actually there is a kind of illegitimate emancipation of that eternal being into something that comes to be. So it's illegitimate, and this is why he has to do penance. He has to pay for that by his own destruction. So he has that problem. He's a dualist. He has being and he has things that come to be and pass away. Everything else around us. People, animals, trees, cold, hot, wet. Everything comes to be and then it passes away. Now he is asking, if that is the case, then what can we say about us humans? What kind of creature that is, he asks. If it just comes to be and passes away. And all that we know about him, that we can say is that all he does through his life, he is doing that penance with the ultimate death. So what is the point of something coming to be if it has to pass away? So this is his obstacle in philosophical development. He is diverging slowly almost into ethics from that concept, metaphysical concept dualism of being and things that come to be and pass away. And he says, what is your existence worth? And if it is worthless, why you are here? Your guilt, I see, causes you to tarry in your existence. With your death, you have to expiate. So there are two questions that can be asked regarding his philosophy. And the first is, actually he asked them as well, how is possible that there is such a thing as the eternal one? How can be eternal one? And he takes the answer from self-contradictory, self-destructing, negating character of the many. So obviously the many, the things which are coming to be and passing away, they explain that there is something else where they come from, which must be eternal. And another problem is that why is that that come to be and passing away? Why everything that has come to be didn't pass away long ago, when so many things have already passed? Why is that happening constantly over and over and over again? So he actually stopped with these questions because he couldn't find an answer. And more he questioned, more he inquired about the depth of being and the problem of coming to be and passing away of those temporary things, ephemeral things. It seems as the answer was always drifting away from here a little bit further. So he couldn't answer that. But his participation is obviously, and his contribution to philosophical discourses in that recognition that everything that comes to be also passes away. So he's rather asking questions, but he's not giving us answers. So the next philosopher that comes before Socrates, quite important one, because he has motivated a lot of philosophers that came later, a lot of great philosophers actually, and that is Heraclitus. Heraclitus was born in 540 BC. So, his philosophy has left huge impact on, as I said, further philosophical development. So, for Heraclitus, there is no such thing as a being. Everything is only, there is only becoming. Nothing can be called being, because everything is made of its opposites. So Heraclitus would say, I am and I am not. And you will see Aristotle will later criticize him for breaking the law of non-contradiction. How can you say I am and I am not at the same time? Because for Aristotle that was logically unacceptable. But Heraclitus, being Heraclitus, will answer you that question. And he says, you will never enter the same river twice. He always spoke, it was very obscure. This is why he's got a name, Heraclitus, the dark, or the obscure. So what it means, you will never enter the same river twice. Because once you enter the river, there will be water passing through. But next time when you enter, there will be different water passing through. There will be different river. And this is why he says, I am and I am not. And now we know, after 2,500 years later, that that may be true. Because before I started this sentence, and now when I'm finishing this sentence, I'm not the same, because everything is different in me. Things are changing. Biochemistry is doing its job. And we are changing constantly. So he saw that the change, the strife, the war, is the father of all things. So there is nothing static, nothing permanent. Everything is constantly changing. For that reason, for Heraclitus, that time also is very arbitrary invention, and also space. Because he says, Logos governs the cosmos. Logos is the ultimate mind, if you want. Logos means knowledge, mind. Everything is Logos. And for some people it is possible to discover the Logos, but not everyone. Majority of people, they're not interested in that. He called them average people or mortals. And he's not interested himself in that average majority of humanity. He says people like to see things as eternal, as rigid. This is why when we use words, our words are actually expression of things understood as eternal. When we say table, it's a chair or a man or a dog or whatever we say, every word always means something rigid. It never considers an option that what we just said may actually not be true, because it's not rigid and it's not eternal, it's only temporary and is ever changing. But he says in order to please ourselves, to make our lives easier, we are using words, we are using sentences in order to justify our belief in those permanent objects, in permanent things, because that thought that everything is impermanent is a quite paralyzing thought. And we don't like that. So nobody wants to think that we are not what we think we are, or that we are not what we are right now. That we are all changing. And as Anaxagoras said, Anaximander, we do penance for our existence and paying it with the ultimate debt. So people don't want to think that way. So this is why even the language of mere mortals, that he would say, is something that is actually showing us that the majority of people do not want to enter that logos or absolute knowledge of things. People don't understand that, and because they don't understand it, they don't like it. But Heraclitus says in his fragments, he says, dogs bark at always on somebody who they don't know. And also he says donkeys prefer grass rather than gold. So this is how he wrote in his fragments. Always sarcastic, always obscure or dark. Or was it? So also asked about how can something turn into into earth, water, or air, and why the fire is not always fire, because for him fire was the father of all things. Fire, strife, war, always the fight between opposites. He said, well, that is a game, so you have to take your life a little bit less serious. You have to be a little bit more cheerful in life. So you see how close, for example, and how much Nietzsche has taken from him. And he says, this is the game that eons have been playing from the day one, like children playing in the sand. So when kids made sand castles, they destroy them and then they make another one. And he sees that the natural cycles of being actually like that. So everything happens as a game. So, but we don't want that. We want exact explanation. So just look at our theories of evolution, for example. How exact explanations we want for something that we cannot explain. And it's becoming comical. Look at quantum mechanics, look at the string theory and projection theory, and all these unexplainable theories explaining each other with unexplainable. Because we cannot explain that. But for Heraclitus, that is not a problem. You don't have to explain something which is not permanent, static, something that can be grasped with concepts. And science is all about concepts. So we try to arrest that nature of being by putting it into our language, which is our invention. So it's a very interesting way of thinking. So Heraclitus was never attracted by public. He never looked for social recognition, public acceptance. He would say, one is better to me than 1,000, meaning I would rather be with one person who is worth something than get all the glory and fame from everyone. So it's known to be like that. Not accidentally, Schopenhauer accepted him as well as Nietzsche and many others after, because obviously when people get to a certain level of knowledge, they don't really attract as much publicity as the ones who reach or project a little bit less. Now, we can see that freed from the clutches of time and space, Heraclitus thinks completely intuitively. He doesn't consider things to be extremely important if they are not super logical. So everything changes. I am and I'm not. Opposite. Everything is made of opposites. How can everything be made of opposites? And then he says opposites constantly fight each other. And at one point, one of those opposites is on the top, like wrestlers. And then on another time, you see the other opposite is on the top. And that goes on and on and on into eternity. Like, for example, day and night. Two opposites that keep changing all the time. So that human inability, displeasure with accepting impermanence has been reflected in our average knowledge or mortal knowledge. Because for us, it's very, as Nietzsche says, this is a paralyzing thought, impermanence. So the next very important philosopher that I'm going to mention tonight is Parmenides, born in 510 BC. Parmenides is completely opposite to Heraclitus. Parmenides is not interested in the content of nature, content of being, as Heraclitus is. He is interested in the form. He wants to think being. He is a logician. And if something is not logical, for Parmenides, that is not real. It has to be logical. So Parmenides actually has left us. Actually, there is only 30% of his fragments left. There is a poem he left which was called On a Nature. And out of these 30% of fragments left, we can conclude quite a lot. We can, connect the dots and understand what his main arguments were. And Parmenides tells us a story and he acts as a prophet because he's been told by the goddess of night the ultimate truth of human knowledge. So he says he was taken once with a heavenly chariot, right? Heavenly mares, and he was taken far away to the goddess of night. She has chosen him because he was special, he was different than other mortals, and he had that ability to think. So now the goddess explains to him that the most important thing is to know what are you thinking about. In the way of inquiry, there are two ways of in those fragments: way of inquiry, and there is the way of mortals. In the way of inquiry, the goddess teaches Parmenides the following. She says, what is must be, and what is you can think. You can only think what is. What is the being, and that can be taught. Being is thought. What is not, you cannot think about, because it's not. And therefore you cannot talk about it. So all that you can think about and talk about is being. Being you cannot say that being was or that being will be, because if you say it was, that means that is not now, but is not possible. The being is eternal, and it always is a permanent presence of it. You cannot say it will be, because it means that it was not. So you can't say that. You see how complicated Parmenides is. This is how he builds the foundation of logic. What it is, it is. This is the tautology, the first premise of logic. Aristotle starts from that as well. This is the principle of identity. A equals A. A cannot be B. So this is what he says. Heraclitus said the opposite. A is A, but can be B as well. I am and I'm not. Now you have Parmenides saying, no, that's a contradiction. You can't say that. But now he goes further, and he says, what is, and that cannot move. Because where would it move? To move, you need to move from somewhere to somewhere, and that other place where you move to has to be empty space. Has to be nothing. Nothing cannot be. Therefore the being cannot move anywhere. Everything is being. There is no time as well. Because how would you move being in time? And time and space for Parmenides, they're completely irrelevant. They don't exist. Because everything it permanently is. Nothing was, nothing will be. Past and future, they're perishable, and they are divided by a fine line of timeless present. Present doesn't exist. Again, whatever I say is already past. It's just been swallowed by the past. And whatever you think is going to happen in the future is not here now. So you see that the problem of time, Schopenhauer as well has the same idea about time. And even Einstein said the top physicists know very well that talking about time is just a fable. Right? So it's kind of left to the rest of the people to juggle with time, presence and past, and keep planning things and cry about the past, it didn't happen or whatever. But in reality, there is nothing like that. All that is, as Heraclitus would say, is doing, is happening. So, for Parmenides, there is no plurality. Everything is one. Things cannot be, everything we see, everything our senses are actually suggesting us to be true is not true, is illogical. So you see how as Nietzsche would say later, how Parmenides literally amputated all the experiences, all the illusions, all the colors, everything which is vivid, everything which is alive, simply in order to get to that single certainty which is being. And if things don't happen as he has predicted with his logic, therefore those things are wrong and they're not real. Whatever we think is real is not. It has to be real in the realm of thinking, or as Buddha said, in the realm of being. You cannot get outside being. You cannot go into something that is not. So that's Parmenides, completely opposite in Heraclitus. So his successor, Zeno, goes even a step further, and he is even more drastic logician. So you see how far logic can go. So there are two examples that actually describe Zeno perfectly. One is when Zeno talks about famous race between Achilles and the turtle, and Zeno says, well, he says there is no way that Achilles can overtake a turtle in a run. Right? How strange that sounds to us now. But he says if the turtle has a small advantage in front of Achilles, Achilles can keep trying, but he will never catch up with the turtle. So how does he explain that? He explains that with a pure logic. He says the following: whatever the distance between Achilles and the turtle is, Achilles has to run first the first half of that distance. Right? Sounds right, logical. And once he reaches that half, the next thing he has to run the half of the remaining half. And he will keep running halves of remaining halves into eternity, and he will never be able to catch up with the turtle. Logically perfect. But, and there is another example about the resting arrow. So he says, look at arrow, look what our senses is telling us. They're telling us that when we throw an arrow, the arrow flies. But Zeno says, wait a little bit, let's look what is actually happening in reality. In reality, at every moment, the arrow possesses certain space and is resting there. Every moment, you move that moment after moment, and the arrow will always be in a certain resting place. It doesn't move. And then he asks, does all this unlimited amount of resting spaces make up for flying? He says they don't. How can 100 or 10,000 resting places make a flight? So you see how far logic goes. Confusing, isn't it? And the last philosopher that I'm going to talk tonight is worth mentioning, because he actually builds the bridge towards next lot we're going to be talking about, of philosophers which are Sophists and Socrates in the next next event. This is Anaxagoras. So Anaxagoras looks at all these things and thinks again problem of being and all these different entities, plurality, things of that many. How can many be? How can all these different things be? And also how they move. All these things that we see around us, everybody, everything is moving around. And now he is asking question, if there is a being, there cannot be plurality. So these things are not different, but we are just experiencing them as different. So what it makes them different? What is that causes that constant influx of things around us and life, if you want to call it? So he comes to the conclusion that this is actually the movement of those things. Everything around us moves. And the problem now with that movement is what makes them move. Do they move by themselves, or there is something outside them that keeps them moving? He finds the answer in ideas, and he says the only thing I can think of is there are ideas, and they move on their own. Nothing moves ideas. But what the peculiar thing about them is that they don't move just themselves, but ideas also move things. So now you see Plato emerging from the distance. Ideas. So it's not necessarily that he didn't have anybody to learn from, but actually Anaxagoras was the first one who saw that in ideas, they are the only ones that nothing moves them. They move themselves, but they also move things, bodies. So I try to explain how this part of pre-Socratic philosophies is actually concerned mainly about metaphysics, not necessarily about ethics. And it was very important for all these thinkers to understand the being, the essence of the world. They were not the only ones who were obsessed with that, because you need to explain where everything comes from. Lots of philosophers, religions, they try to explain the same things after them. And we have different explanations. Schopenhauer also took will as the essence of all things. So there is a constant search for that first mover, the first cause, the essence of the world, the essence of the being. But these were just the beginnings. So for example, for Thales, the water was the essence of all things. For Heraclitus, it was fire. For Parmenides, it was reason, thinking. Reason, thinking is being. You can only think being, you can't think which is not. And then Anaxagoras finally reaches that point, the critical point of understanding ideas as the essence of all things. So quite anthropocentristic view, clearly, because as Heidegger once asked his students, if you take man outside the world, what will remain? And they couldn't answer the question. And he said nothing, because the world would not exist without man. And Anaxagoras is pointing right to that spot. So ideas are the prime movers. They are the ones that move themselves and move things. So you see how this search, this attempt to understand the world in the days when they didn't have microscopes and science that we have today, and this understanding is not actually that far. For Anaxagoras, for example, essence of all things also, it was something like he called sand-like substance, which everything is made of, sand-like substance. Democritus later, which I didn't mention tonight, there's no time, atomists, they realized that things are made of some very, very small particles, maybe even invisible, but it must be like that, something. So that striving for perfection, to analyze, analytical minds, analytical philosophy started developing very, very early, what everything is made of. And you see, this is basically the essence of metaphysical, philosophical inquiry. So, yes, I think there are quite a few interesting questions that I will get from you now. And thank you very much for giving me time to tell you all this.